Trade rumors are intensifying surrounding the Toronto Maple Leafs and Nick Robertson as more and more reports and rumors are starting to come out about what team Nick Robertson is going to get traded to, following the reports revealing that a trade is imminent. And this new report might shock you all. So stay tuned for that on this episode. But before we do, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, about 72% of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to hit that button. But Darius, we have a lot to go over today, specifically surrounding Nick Robertson. And again, we've been talking about this a lot. We talked about it in our stream a couple days ago. Nick Robertson has been the big talk and the big hitting point of conversation for Leafs fans for a while. And this one might surprise some Leafs fans, and that is in the form of a trade to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, we know the report came out the other day that Nick Robertson is sticking to the idea of playing somewhere else other than the Leafs, and a trade pitch sees the Canadiens acquire disgruntled Maple Leafs forward, and the trade is Nick Robertson for a 2025 second and a 2025 third. Now, on the surface level, it looks pretty rough. We know that we covered some reports saying that Nick Robertson, Brad Treliving, if they're going to trade Nick Robertson, they would want to do it in exchange for a first-round pick at the least, or maybe a prospect who was drafted in the mid-first round over the past few years. This one is for a second and a third, and as much as we like to hate on it, it's probably a realistic outcome. Not necessarily the Canadiens, but when you're looking at the package that the Leafs get back here, looks pretty realistic to me. And as sad as that is, we know that Robertson is a very solid player. It's probably his value right now, for being honest.
Yeah, like you said, this is more a little realistic towards what I think Nick Robertson might fetch if he is traded. I still am going to sit on the fact that I think he should sign and stay with the Maple Leafs. I'm going to stick to that. But yeah, I think that's a little more realistic. I'm not sure the Leafs are going to be able to get a first round pick or someone who was drafted in the mid first round or whatever they worded it as over the last couple of years. I'm not sure that's going to happen because Nick Robertson hasn't played a lot in the NHL. That's the fact of the matter. And last year he wasn't really given an opportunity, so he couldn't put up as many points as he would have liked or played as much as he would have liked. So there's no real big sample size for him for other teams to be able to take him on. I'm sure there's a lot of teams that would like him, but in return for a first round pick, that's a little steep. Now, in terms of the Montreal Canadiens trade proposal, I think it's a bit absurd. And I know everyone's a little excited to see if Nick Robertson's going to be traded, and everyone loves trades, right? And the season's almost here, so everyone's getting excited. But this one specifically is a little absurd. I think it's too little for Nick Robertson, and not little in the way of, the assets, because of course, second round pick is good, right? A second round pick could make the NHL one day. But I think the Leafs, if they're trading Nick Robertson can play in the NHL right now. If they're going to trade Nick Robertson, they need to trade him for something that can play, or someone, I should say, something in a package. Maybe it's a player and something else, but they need somebody in return who can play in the NHL right now, because, they're subtracting somebody who should be playing in the NHL for them. And if they get, just draft picks in return, you're not going to see those draft picks anytime soon. And maybe you could flip them for something else that can play in your lineup. Sure. But in return for Nick Robertson, I think you need something that will play in the, on the Leafs.
Yeah, especially if you're trading with a rival in the Montreal Canadiens. Like
that too.
2 picks. Now, again, this is probably what other teams are trying to actively and calling Brad Treliving. It's probably part of the reason why the trade hasn't gone through yet, is because the value is lower than what Brad Treliving wants. It's a couple of picks. I think at the very least, the Leafs, they're trying to win now. We'll go through a bunch of things here. On paper, this deal makes sense as Robertson is a former second-round pick, and when he is given the chance to play in the NHL, he does have success. Montreal, meanwhile, has 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, 3 third-round picks, and I believe this article may have been posted a week or 2 ago, I think right before the Line trade happened, so that I think they might have an extra now second-round picks. They took on a second-round pick in the Line trade. But you look at the lineup now, and again, we had this on our stream the other day. These are the projected lineups. They really aren't realistic at all, but it's not including Nick Robertson. You'd obviously probably want Domi. We can have a whole conversation about it. But Darius, looking at this, you wouldn't want Domi in the third line. Let me be very clear. We definitely want Domi on the team. But if you're trading Nick Robertson, you'd want a guy. Now, we've discussed they definitely need a third line center. That trade obviously doesn't get you a third line center. You need someone who can slide into the lineup right now, because the lineup, especially in the third and fourth line, isn't looking phenomenal. There is some decent ways you can shake things around. You can move, maybe split up Matthews and Marner. There's a lot of ways to do this to make the lineup deeper, but the easiest way is to trade Nick Robertson for a guy that can help immediately, and 2 picks doesn't do it unless they take the picks that they get, combine it with another pick, and maybe flip that for a player that is of more value, and maybe package along Timothy Liljegren in a deal to get some other assets. Like, there's ways to do it, and I don't necessarily hate the framework of a pick deal if it means flipping them into other assets for teams that are rebuilding, like Chicago, a bunch of other teams, San Jose.
Yeah, I don't hate that either, as long as they turn it into a roster player at the end of the day. And through a conversation we were having on the stream we had the other day, I was starting to feel like the Leafs are going to make a bigger trade than we realize, right? Like everyone's talking about it could be Nick Robertson for a draft pick or Nick Robertson for this player. Maybe it's Nick Robertson and David Camp and something else for a bunch of players and they rejig the lineup because like we were talking about in previous videos, this lineup right here, and obviously this is not what's going to, it's not going to look like this day one of the season, but this looks incomplete. This mashup of players, it just looks incomplete to me. Like there's no real identity anywhere, right? It just seems like a bunch of players thrown on your screen. So I would like to see like Domi moved up, right? And there's a bunch you can do with the lineup. And I think Holmberg slots over to center, maybe even fourth line center. Like you mentioned, they need a third line center, I think, moving forward now. That might be the move because I think Domi is better suited on the wing and probably higher up in your lineup. So maybe they look at that and maybe Nick Robertson's included in that trade. There's a lot that could happen here over the next couple of days. And I'm starting to believe that it could be a bigger move than just Nick Robertson to, potentially the Montreal Canadiens. Although that trade proposal itself is a bit crazy. And also to the Montreal Canadiens, I'm not sure you want to trade Nick Robertson to a rival, but if you can get something you can, really use, maybe you do look at that. But again, I'm not sure about trading in division and of course to the Montreal Canadiens because that may come back to burn you. But looking at their, lineup, there's a couple guys maybe they could use. Like if you look at Armia, maybe that could be someone you can use. I see a lot of people posting about Josh Anderson. I see a lot of that on Twitter. Don't think that makes sense. The salary doesn't make sense. I'm not sure I want that player on the team anyway, if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Armia could make some sense if you're going to trade Robertson there, but I'm scared of Robertson scoring 35 goals or something like that with the Montreal Canadiens. So I think there's a huge move coming here. Not huge in terms of, trading Mitch Marner or anything like that, but a huge move in, I think the lineup is going to look very different very quickly if they're able to pull something off here, because again, training camp is coming up and teams are going to start looking at solidifying their rosters. So the Leafs got to move pretty quickly.
Yeah. And again, I think maybe if you do a Frank McGrana pick and Joel Armia, that would make a lot more sense than a second and a third. If you get rid of one of the, maybe you get rid of the third and it's a second and Armia, you can start to convince yourself a lot easier to maybe do it. Even though Canadians, I mean, I don't love the trade just because you're giving him to a rival. But at the same time, I don't know how much GMs, I mean, they do definitely take that into account. But if you're getting good assets back and the Canadians offer you the best package, Canadians aren't close to competing right now. They're not going to compete over the next couple of years or 3 years for a Stanley Cup, so it could make some sense there. Let us know what your thoughts are on all that in the comments, because we know if you look back to Brad Treliving's comments about Nick Robertson, he said, I've certainly known that there was some frustration with Nick, but we look at Nick as an excellent player. There's a great opportunity for Nick here. We need him to be a good player for us. I'm not going to get into any speculation or public back and forth. We will just leave it at that and continue to move forward. I mean, they haven't moved forward in regards of Nick Robertson yet, but it seems like even though the sides are very far apart on everything, he's still a very good player, and Brad Treliving recognizes that. But that'll wrap it up. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Do you want to see him traded to the Canadiens, or should they stay far, far away? Let us know. We'll see you tomorrow.